The fog never quite lifted that morning. It just thinned enough for men to see the dark cut of the tree line and the white crust forming on their sleeves. Along the roads leading into Bastogne, paratroopers from the 101st Airborne took positions in shallow scrapes, boots gone stiff, breath hanging like smoke. Trucks from Combat Command R of the 10th Armored had pushed through the night and stopped in small towns that were already names on someone's field map: Noville, Longvilly, Warden, Marvy. They were told to hold the roads, hold the crossings, hold anything that might look like a way through. Engines idled until the fuel ran thin. In the half-light, the first German shells came in, short and then long, feeling for batteries and road junctions. It was December 19th, 1944, and the men of a division that had jumped into Normandy 6 months earlier were settling into a new kind of fight in the Ardennes. A siege, without winter clothing, and with a ring of armor tightening around them. The order that sent the 101st North from Mourmelon had come the day before, fast enough that men climbed into open trucks with blankets around their shoulders and hot food still in their cups. They arrived in Belgium cold and under strength, some units missing their heavy weapons, many without winter boots. Brigades of German armor and Volksgrenadiers had punched holes in the thin American lines the week before, and the bulge that gave the battle its name was growing by the day. Bastogne mattered because 7 roads converged there. Whoever held the hub could turn the spokes. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander with Maxwell Taylor stateside, took his map boards into town hall and began pushing pins into a perimeter that looked wide when traced on paper and suddenly small when measured in rifles and rounds. Roadblocks went up with logs and snow. The 501st and 506th Parachute Infantry spread north and east toward Foy and Bizery. The 502nd held the western shoulder. The 327th Glider Infantry filled gaps with men who had never been trained for a siege and did not ask for a different job. Cannon of the Parachute Field Artillery Battalions, 105S and 155S, rolled into orchards and schoolyards and were sighted by officers with frozen pencils between their teeth. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion nosed their open-topped M18s into hedgerows where they could hear, if not see, the clank of German tracks on icy roads. On the approaches, small towns became short battles. In Noville, a mixed force under Lieutenant Colonel James Laprade and Team Desabry of the 10th Armored fought panzers at street corners until shells turned barns into burning screens. At Warden and Marvy, Team O'Hara played the same game: block, fire, fall back, block again, buying hours with gasoline and nerves. Civilians who had waited out 4 years of occupation watched uniforms change again and carried bread and blankets down to cellars. Snow fell and then turned to blown sugar in every doorway and cut. By the 21st, Bastogne was encircled. The fog that kept men from seeing more than 100 yards kept aircraft on the ground and pilots guessing. Rations were cut to stretch tins and biscuits that already tasted like gravel. Ammunition numbers went up on chalkboards because the boards made pretending possible. How many 105mm shells for defensive fires? How many flares left at each battalion? How many belts of .30-06 still dry under canvas? Medics worked in a makeshift aid station off the square and in cellars where the floor sloped and the water from melted snow found the low corners. A Belgian nurse, René Lemaire, came in from town and moved among litters with a metal bowl and a voice that steadied men's hands when morphine and blankets did not. Doctors learned to write by candle stub and to judge the difference between a man who would travel and a man who would have to stay when the line moved again. That afternoon, a German party came up under a white flag with a typed note. The wording was formal: honorable surrender to save the encircled town from annihilation by artillery. McAuliffe read it and looked at his staff. Someone said the only answer to that was nuts. He wrote the word on a sheet, signed it, "The American Commander," and sent it back through the lines with Colonel Joseph Harper of the 327th. When the German major asked for a translation, Harper told him it meant they could go to hell. The reply went down the perimeter in minutes, passed man to man between foxholes and gun pits. The word was comic and also not comic at all. It said everything needed about how long the division intended to stay. The ring squeezed. German infantry probed at night and came hard by day under the flayed bark of trees that had taken bursts meant for men. In the north, squads fought close around Foy and Bizery, where a road bent through dark woods and every fence post looked like a rifleman at 50 yards. In the south, tanks felt for the shallow spots in the American line and found the tank destroyers waiting with engines already warm. Drivers coached to take the first shot and then yank the gear lever before the return round came through the open turret. Artillery fired so much that barrels turned slushy with heat under a skin of frost. Gunners learned to time counter-battery to the second, count the inbounds, wait through the lull, and throw steel back at the muzzle flashes they would never see. The paratroopers named the worst places the way men name things they need to talk about later. Purple Heart Corner, Dead Man's Ridge, names that stuck because patrols had to cross them anyway. On December 23rd, the weather broke. The sky went blue and the cold got harder, but for the first time all week, the cloud was gone. Men heard engines before they saw the dots, and then the dots turned into C-47s pushing low, airdrop doors open, crews kicking bundles with white and red and green parachutes out into the light. Some loads drifted into German lines and were recovered with a laugh and a wave by the men who had been supposed to die under them. Most landed in the fields and streets of the town, where squads ran to yank parachutes free and drag crates behind walls. Ammunition came first. Medical supplies and bandages came next. The outburst of cheer did not last longer than a hot swig, but it changed the math on the chalkboard. The next day, fighters came with the lifting fog, P-47s that rolled down out of the sun and stitched road columns with .50 caliber. The men in foxholes still had to watch the tree line, but for once the sky belonged to them. Christmas Eve brought more shelling, and the thing men dread most in a siege, fire in a crowded place. Bombs fell near the aid station and set it burning. René Lemaire, who had stayed when others were sent away, was killed trying to pull men out. Survivors, wounded and staff both, were carried across the square to another cellar while rounds came in with a regularity that made men flinch even when they thought they had turned that flinch into a habit. The chaplain worked until his hands could not hold a book steady. The kitchen sent out coffee that tasted of smoke and metal shavings. Officers walked the line on Christmas morning and wished men a day their faces did not show them feeling. On the 26th, the sound that had been rumor for days came over the ridge, a deep diesel note under the thin two-stroke whine of scout cars. The 4th Armored Division of Patton's 3rd Army broke through near Assenois with Shermans that had pushed over icy roads from the south as fast as maintenance and prayer would let them. The link-up was not a parade. It was a set of handshakes in a ditch between men who had lived a week by the rule that every minute had to be accounted for, and men who had spent the same week turning distance into a promise they could keep. The perimeter did not relax in a breath. It thinned, pushed out, and then stiffened again while the wounded were sent back and the dead were counted. In the days that followed, the 101st held while the Bulge to the north and west was beaten back by weight coming down from Allied armies that had steadied after the first shock. Bastogne turned from an island into an anchor. The men who had been told by rumor they were relieved learned they were reinforced instead, and their orders did not change much. Hold ground, clear villages, and keep the road hub from changing hands. When they finally rotated into reserve in January, they left behind wrecks rimed with frost, shell holes that would fill with meltwater, and a town square where no corner of stone had escaped a chip. What stands out in the records are not speeches, but measurements. Temperatures low enough to split fingers, ration weights that went down to stretch a week past its end, artillery tables that record the number of defensive fires requested and the number actually fired, battery logs with strings of coordinates written in a hand that turns tight when the shelling comes in, division messages that begin with ammunition on hand and end with a joke about the coffee that says more about morale than any report can. The word sent to the Germans sits in the middle of it all like a pinned specimen. 4 letters that held a perimeter together because they said, in one syllable, that the only direction anyone would move without orders was forward. There is a smell to winter fighting that photographs can't carry. Cordite in cold air, wool that has not dried once in a week, oil burned on a too-hot breech. There is also a silence to relief that no parade day can reproduce. The men of the 101st Airborne and the armored teams that stood with them left Bastogne with faces the color of fatigue and a division reputation that would travel. Some would go on to fight at Foy and on to Germany. Some would go home with feet that took months to feel again. A Belgian town would spend spring turning rubble into rooms and would keep a place in its square for a nurse who had tried to be in 2 places at once when fire made that impossible. The story that began in fog and snow ended with a road open and the line bending back the way maps say it should. The method was simple and terrible. Men in holes, guns that answered calls, and a refusal to let a typed ultimatum take the place of a day's work. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.